Everybody. So I'm Shannon, and today we're going to be talking about doing market research on your book. This is something that I am kind of a nerd about. I'm a nerd about a number of things, but I went from kind of hating the idea of marketing kind of years ago to sort of being intrigued on how it works and what actually is marketing. We do a lot of things we don't realize are marketing, but also the value of just, surface level um, research to kind of figure stuff out. And it can be really helpful for people who are both looking to traditionally publish their books. It can be important for people who are right to market authors. It can be important for people who wrote for love and are trying to figure out what to do with their book. And it can be important if you are directly querying small and medium-sized presses as well. So basically, normally we say don't market stuff to everybody, but marketing is something that everybody should do. So a little bit about me. I am one of the founders of Houston Independent Authors, which is sort of like an informal group of us who put things together like this. I'm also the coordinator for the Houston chapter of the Editorial Freelancers Association, and I have been a developmental editor for over a decade. And I also coordinate, along with a lot of our Tomeworks editors, the Houston Science Fiction and Fantasy Meetup Group. I'm one of the founders of the Tomeworks Editing Collective, and I am one of the creators of Editing Science Fiction and Fantasy for the Editorial Freelancers Association. But if you are looking for some reason, you're over here and you're like, I'm trying to become an editor, one of the other things that I've done for the EFA is small business plans for editors. So if you are scrambling to try to figure out some of this like businessy side of things as an editor or writer, I'm kind of a nerd and can probably help. So anyway, that's a little bit of my background. And my first experience with a lot of this marketing stuff actually wasn't in the bookish sphere. My husband is really big into the startup community and would drag me along to volunteer events for like incubators. And when I was working as a nurse in clinical research, I ended up getting yanked into being basically like someone to help a founding startup who was trying to create be like a medical device. And I kind of had to, unfortunately, swiftly show them all the FDA regulations that they had not realized existed in that realm. But basically, it was through osmosis at first, and I really grew to love, what all this stuff was and why it exists. And it's a necessary evil for most of us, but it's really interesting. So this isn't going to be an incredibly in-depth, I'm not going to give you a marketing plan for your book, but I am going to give you tools and ideologies and help essentially putting you on the right path. That is my goal. And if you do have questions, Daphne is here with me. She's going to be able to see a lot of your questions before I do. So if she sees anything relevant, she'll interrupt me. If she thinks that it's something that can wait, we'll talk at the end. I tend to run long though. So we'll see how this goes. All right, we did kind of talk a little bit about what the process is going to be for this workshop. But again, we're going to talk about important things that are market research that will go into your career or your launch plan or your search for representation. We're going to actually go into what a competitive assessment is versus concept testing as it relates to books and book planning. We're going to go over some free and at-cost tools that you can use. And we're just going to talk a little bit about your mental health because this can get overwhelming. And you may not necessarily need to go as in depth as the author next door. So there's things to think about as well as far as like how deep into the rabbit hole you're going to go. So first things first, why bother? It's an endeavor, it's effort, it's work. Why are we doing this in the first place? One of the biggest reasons is you need to have realistic expectations for when you try to sell your book, regardless of what avenue you're using, regardless if there are other people who are in between you and the actual like sale because you've got an agent, you've got a publisher, all that stuff. You need to have a reasonable goal for yourself and you should have a reasonable goal for your books so that you don't come out jaded and disappointed. In life, finding ways to make yourself happy, those are important. And if you put yourself in a situation where you have unreasonable goals, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And we want you to write more books, even if those books are going to be in niches that are relatively small but beloved. The more books that are out there, the more people reading, the better this world will be. Daphne, I do have a real quick question. Do we have a troll in the waiting room, or is that somebody that fell out?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Do we have a troll in the waiting room, or is that somebody that accidentally fell out?
We have multiples, so I'm gonna say no, let's not do that.
Okie dokes. All right, let's keep going. Research can also help you decide between different comps as you query. Knowing more about what sells versus what you like is important because the agent isn't going to have the same impression of books that you love that are in your genre as they would books that are selling in your genre, and those are two different things. You're going to want to review your successful competitors to see if there are trends of who's publishing them. Or where they're selling, and who you should approach for distribution. This is really important for things like, small presses or medium-sized presses, but also, if you want to be, wide, or if you want to stick with Kindle Unlimited. Um, you can figure out your own marketing tactics by seeing what's working for everybody else. Nobody really wants to be number one. It's often better to be the second person who tries something, or even like the fifth or sixth or 10th person to try something, because all the stuff that didn't work, other people figure that out before you, and you can just figure out what you want to do because what survived is what works. Like what tactics are surviving is what works. And then seeing the success or failure of books in a particular niche, especially if you're doing a right to market kind of thing, will help you decide if it's worth actually writing the book in the first place. Before you write, if your whole goal is to make money, why would you write somewhere where there's not proof that it'll work out? Studying your competitors also allows you to see trends like in keyword usage inside of your copy. It could also help you with figuring out what your cover should look like. Excuse me. It'll help you figure out what kind of appeals to make as you try to sell your book and your advertising. There's all sorts of stuff that you can glean by just watching and seeing what other people do and what works for them. And then many subgenres are actually like boosted up in the sales ranking categories because there are romance subcategories inside of them. And it's important for you to figure out if you're not writing a romance, if it looks like your category is doing really well, when in reality the books that sell are the ones that are romantic. Romance in general is one of the highest selling markets out there. And so if you go in to look at, books that are basically like mob books, and it looks like it's selling super duper well, but when you go in and see the top 20, you realize, oh, it's all mafia romance. That tells you that the information you may have found saying that mafia or mob books are selling really well is skewed to a particular subgenre. And it may or may not make sense for you to write to that. Again, if you're looking to, just sell. So, another thing to remember is that research alone will not make you a bestseller. There are roughly, depending on who you look at, between like 300 and 500,000 books published every year. And of those, approximately 200 will sell more than 100,000 copies. If you are looking to become a millionaire off of being an author off of one book, that's highly unrealistic. So you can do a ton of market research. You can do a bunch of stuff to position yourself really well. But the odds are not ever in your favor, unfortunately. So again, having a realistic expectation of what you're selling, who you're selling it to, all that jazz, is important. And the market research can help you figure that out, but it's not going to necessarily like be the only thing that impacts whether or not your book becomes one of those 200 or not. You have a selection of people who will buy your book prospectively, right? Your sales pool is only a certain size. Knowing more about it won't necessarily make that sales pool bigger. For most of us, if we're writing our first book, our sales pool is limited by the number of people who can read in the language we're writing. Our sales pool is limited to the number of people who that book would appeal to. Our sales pool is limited by the number of people who can afford to buy books. Our sales pool is limited to the number of people who will buy books in whatever medium we're using. So if if you're writing a book that is most likely going to be read by people who don't like e-readers, and your main means of selling the book is an electronic version, that's going to impact the number of people who are willing to buy your book, but it doesn't change the size of the prospective like segment that you can sell to. Marketing tactics as well do not necessarily lead to success. There are a number of things that are inside of your purview that you can do to make the book more likely to sell, like making sure the book is good, which is subjective, of course, but making sure that it's polished, making sure that the book is readable, making sure that the book hits your genre expectations. Those are things that you can control. Making sure that you market it, making sure that you have a newsletter group, making sure that you show up in places where your readers are more likely to be. Those are tactics that could potentially help you sell the book. There are things out there that you can't control, though. If somebody just published a book that is very similar to yours, it can go both ways. If it's super popular and people want something just like it, well, boom, that actually helped your sales. But if it saturated the market in some way, then it's going to drastically decrease like the likelihood that people are going to come back and read your book. There could be things like political upheaval, changes in the economy that change how people spend money. The SEO algorithms for both search engines and for like social media change drastically. So you may use tactics, for Facebook that worked really well 10 years ago, and they don't do squat now. These are not things that you can necessarily control, and they just sort of like show up and they cause people to scramble. I mean, you are not guaranteed success, unfortunately. One of the best things that you can do, and I'm sure you've all heard this, is to keep writing. The more you write, the more likely it is that you can sell the book you just finished writing, right? And then the more that people buy that most recent book, the more likely they are to go back and see what you've already written and go through your backlist. And then that's how you sell the previous books, even if they didn't have like super successful launches. So the first things first, an issue that a lot of people have, especially if they're newer authors, is they have a hard time defining their genre because their book is special, right? Like how we've all been there. Our book is the most special that ever specialed. And you don't understand why people just want to put you and your book inside of some sort of box because it's so special. I mean, yeah, it's like these other books, but at the same time, it's different. It's so different that you can't conceptualize it. You have to stop doing that. You need to be able to figure out your genre. You can't sell something that you can't describe. There are a number of philosophies that you can do to try to figure it out. A lot of times, figuring out what your climax is representative of as far as genre is the easiest way. Beating the bad guy sounds like a hero's journey, right? It's a good versus evil. So that narrows things down a little bit. You overcome the obstacles to be with the love interest. Boom, you know you're writing romance. If your climax is about getting with the love interest, that's romance. Regardless of what else is in there, romance is your primary genre. You fail and become subsumed by internal demons. You're writing a tragedy. You might be writing contemporary fiction. You might be writing literary fiction that, being overwhelmed and losing at the end probably leads you in those directions. The hero discovers and apprehends the killer. You're looking at thrillers or mysteries, and you're going to look at subgenres that go into that. You can also look at setting first storytelling, which is really important for things like science fiction and fantasy, but also historical fiction. If you are in Prussia, most of you probably know is that Prussia no longer exists in the world, at least not under that name. Then we're probably looking at historical fiction. If you're on an intergalactic dreadnought, we're probably looking at something like space opera. If you're at a ski lodge in the Alps at Christmas, that sounds a lot like romance. Also cozy mystery. If you're on a pirate's dirigible, we may be looking at steampunk. So using your setting can also help you figure out what it is. A couple other things, your trope first storytelling. Subgenres are very well known for tropes. Enemies to lovers, very clearly is romance. You know, if there's a wizard teaching the boy all he knows before being killed by a bad guy, this looks like epic fantasy. A king must kill the baby to stop the prophecy from coming to fruition. Sounds like some sort of dark fantasy. There's a dead body found at a party and no one can leave. Sounds like the locked door mystery. You can also have character first storytelling, robot with the heart of gold, blah, blah. Basically, use some way to figure out what major genre you're in. And also, this can help you figure out what your subgenres are in. Now, this is even before you do any of the markety kind of things. And there will be a lot of nuance when you try to figure out the actual like subgenres and niches. And we'll get into that later in this presentation. Why would you do it if you're not trying to sell your own book? If you're trying to get your book to small and medium presses, doing market research can help you find options that sell in your genre. That's one of the biggest things. We may not think about the research we do to find the presses that we're going to send our books to as being market research, but it is. You don't want to send your manuscript over to a press that doesn't sell the kind of thing that you write. You know, specifically if you're getting into niche presses, then maybe focus on things like particular genders, particular sexualities, particular you know, lifestyle backgrounds or ethnicities and that kind of thing. If you are sending a book or a manuscript that does not hit upon their core values, you have wasted your time and theirs. One of the things too is you can figure out who is actually publishing the people who are doing well in your genre if they're not self-published, and then go over to the publisher and see if they're accepting applications. You know, if their authors are doing really well, that's an indication that's a good press to work with. And then you can also, if you have more than one option for your presses, figure out which ones work better for you by checking like things like ratings, higher sales, seeing which ones have advertising budgets, which ones that are more easy to find during Google searches, things like that. The more presence they have, the easier they are to search, the better their clients are doing. Those are things that should weigh into your decision on who is going to sell your book. And one of the biggest things, especially for people who are newer, is you need to evaluate scams. This is going to come up again here because scams are so common. If you have somebody says, "Oh my God, we found your book. We love your book. You just need to pay us $5,000 and we'll publish your book. We have all these, you know, great names that are publishing with us." Well, who are these great names, right? Can you research these other authors who've been published by this company? And do they actually have ratings and sales to back it up? If the answer is no, especially if they want money from you, this is an indication that you're getting scammed. And the market research is what's telling you with like legitimacy, they're not what they're saying they are, and you should avoid them. Okay, agent searches. You are looking for a unicorn, right? You can use competitor data to find their agents and submit them as well. And I use the word competitor a lot here, but we are not going fisticuffs with other authors. Most of the times, the other authors who are our competitors are actually helping us sell books. So they are our friends. Maybe we're friendies. I don't know. But you want to be able to see what agents are actually selling. You can get an agent, but the gulf between having an agent and selling that book to a publisher is wide. And so knowing that that agent has a track record of selling books in your genre or in your subgenre is important. You can compare multiple offers between agents if you're that lucky, based upon that success. And one of the other things you can do when you do market research is often figure out how long it'll take for the agent to get back to you with either rejection or acceptance. And that can be an important key, you know, for who you are actually going to send your stuff to. This is another place where you might find scams because there are scam agents all over the place that will sign you up and try to sell your book, but their rates will not be industry norms, where they'll take 70% of your income, or they'll take you know, XYZ of your rights. And that kind of leaves you in a corner where you're being exploited. And then if you are going to go take your book to pitch competitions and things like that, doing a little bit of research on the agents, who they sell, who they've signed, who they've acquired. That might be the difference between which one you go see or which one of them you try to do your pitch with. People who write for love. Again, make reasonable sales goals. You've already written the book. You're just trying to figure out how to find readers for it, right? You want to do research to determine strategies, and then also get campaign ideas. Once you know what a reasonable expectation is for people who write in your genre, it can impact how much you want to spend of your own money trying to sell this book. Because you can see if it's reasonable or not to spend $5,000 on a book that may only have a $500 return in the first year. You may want to check out your competitors to figure out who's reading their books and figure out what your audience pool looks like. And then if there are certain things that are working in their marketing, either gimmicks, lost leads, freebies, that kind of thing, seeing how that person does those can help give you ideas for how to do your own marketing. And you also can see whether or not you want to go wide or being limited. I'm trying to go fast because I realize like we are already at 120 and I have like 30 slides. Right to market people. It's good to research the new and upcoming niches where there's high sales potential, but relatively low number of competing books. Evaluate the return on investment for writing in a beaten path genre. Figure out the expectations for genres that you're kind of unfamiliar with, but you think you might want to write in, so that you're making sure that you're writing something that actually meets the audience's demand. And then you can also figure out if this is something where you can just write a standalone book and be successful, or if you're going to have to commit to like 10 books and a theater production, right? And then at the end of the day, if you are trying to make money, is it worth your time and effort to write a book in this genre in the first place? So doing 5 hours of research now may save you 500 hours of work later. Okay, competitive assessments. Daphne, how boring does this sound? Oh, she's laughing at me.
Personally, I enjoy competitor assessments because I like to read the things that I write. And so I'm like, oh, I'll read that. And I end up buying
That's
5 more books.
so that's one of the good things about writing something that you love is because you'll find fun stuff for you to go read. But competitive assessments basically means that you're evaluating the things that are out there right now in your genre, or if you're not writing books, it's basically like what is out there on the marketplace, who's fulfilling a need, right? But in reality, what you're doing is you're trying to figure out what's working for them so you can step on top of them to get a little bit higher. So there's kind of like a fighty element of it. I hope you like Excel. Excel is going to be your friend because you're going to want to put a bunch of this information into your Excel so that you can actually evaluate it. And we're going to go back and forth. We're going to go back and forth, and this is going to be fun because I'm going to show you some Kindle, ranking things and give you an idea of how you can evaluate them. But anyway, so you're going to look for best-selling titles and their ranks. You're going to look for author popularity. You're going to want to figure out how these authors that are doing well are pricing their books. We've talked a little bit already about marketing tactics. And other things that we often will forget is we're not supposed to read our own reviews, right? But there's no reason you can't go read other people's reviews. And those can be really helpful in figuring out where there are unmet needs. And what that means for books is where the author has not given the audience something they want to be fulfilled by that book. And that is like a lantern hanging on something you should add to your book to make it more fulfilling for that same audience. Okay, best-selling titles and ranks. You need to narrow things down, right? How deep does your genre go? Romance has very clear niches across their book genres. They go deep. Now, you need to figure out, if yours will go that deep. If you're writing something like a zombie horror book, you may only be looking at dystopia as a possible like main subgenre for your science fiction or your fantasy. If you're doing romance, you might get all the way down to the guy likes her feet. and that be totally legitimate for how you market your book. So those are things to think about, is how far down does your niche go? And if you are doing something that's very niche, can it still appeal to an entire genre or only to that niche? And you do that by reading other books in your niche and seeing where they're ranking. And we will go to Kindle in a minute to talk about that. Does your book actually appeal to multiple subgenres? Now you can put your book, especially in on Amazon, into multiple book categories. And some of those are your big umbrella categories, like you might put it under romance, and then you have two other romance subgenres underneath it. Or you may specifically focus in on a bunch of subgenres because you have elements that are cool for all of them. You may want to figure out if you have a very specific target or ideal reader that you can use to determine like who's a better book because you know that kind of reader likes this book too. And then does your book specifically appeal to a preference, a nerddom, a hobby, a dark leaning? Because there's a lot of romance that goes into things like taboo, but there's a lot of other stuff that we write that may also go into taboo things as well, like the amount of gore on the page for horror, the amount of cruelty in our psychological thrillers. There are things where, are you hitting to an extreme? And if so, who reads that extreme? So these are things of thinking about so you can help yourself narrow down who your best comps and competitors are. So the books that have the most in common with yours on their face may not necessarily be the best comps for you. Because again, you could be writing a book about a chosen one who goes on an adventure and becomes a mage and ends up being king. But the genre specifics of that can be severely different if you're writing something that ends up where the bad guy wins versus someone who's writing this chosen one book for a YA audience and the good guy wins. So even if you have very similar like components to your book, doesn't mean that you're going for the same market. Figure out who's reading that market. This is one of those things where you may branch out and look at, the author's interactions on social media. You may go into their newsletter and kind of figure out, based upon the newsletters that you're receiving from them, who are they tailoring their communications to? Does this look like they're talking to people who you expect to read your book or not? And then, focus on the people who are publishing in the same way that you are planning to publish. Your marketing strategies for somebody who has an entire trad publishing industry behind them are going to be way different than somebody who's an indie, published author. And so actually, this is a good time for me to stop sharing for a second, and then I'm going to share my screen. And let's just pop up into Kindle. I'm going to see if I can make these go away. Go away, or let's go down here. So how do you figure out sales ranking? Let's just pop into here real quick and let's find a book. So let's look up Vampire Western. Maybe I'm writing a Vampire Western. Oh, okay. Vampires of El Norte. Everything else doesn't really look fancy, and this one has some reviews. So when you're going to look, you're going to see two different or three different, sometimes four different ways that you can buy the book. I'm going to go ahead and click on Kindle. And if you scroll down, you can find some information on here that's kind of interesting. So when you're looking at the categories that they're selling in, you have this bestsellers rank. And what this means is the rank inside of the entire Kindle store. This is important. The bigger that number is, the less you sell. The smaller that number is, the closer to like the top 10, top 100 you are. So you want a small number here. Kind of like how you want to be number 5 in vampire horror or number 101 in gothic fiction, or somehow 191 in historic romances. These small numbers are good. But this is the big one. This one is one that you can come over to and try to figure out how much that person is actually making off their books or how many books they're selling on a in a given time frame. And I'll show you how to do that as well. But this is a good place to figure out what the niches are. If this looks like something that you're writing, or say that I'm writing, this niche, if I'm writing a vampire western, seeing that somebody who's doing well is selling in these categories gives me new places to research. We will talk about uh, ways of doing this with tools that cost money. But if you don't want to spend money, which I don't think you should necessarily spend money, especially if you're just starting out, you're going to be doing it sort of the slog through. So figure out what these are, and then you're going to go figure out your rankings. Another thing that you can find over here is the publisher. So if you are interested in seeing if this is actually just the author who has created an LLC, or if this is an actual small press publisher, this tells you who it is, and then you can go research from there. You can go through a lot of holes when it comes to research. So this is a good place to start. Unfortunately, other sellers besides Amazon don't do ranking systems. So it's not like you can go to Barnes and Noble and see the same information, except for, their sales. Kindle is the only one that I know that does that, but there are other ways of also finding ranking information outside of them. So that's an important thing to look at. Another thing too that you're going to want to look at, oops, I shouldn't have gone all the way down, is when was this book released? One of the things that you may have always heard about comps is that you want to do something that's been released recently, and that is because you can use the person's market strategies. But if they did really well, but they sold the book 10 years ago, the strategies for them are not going to be the strategies for you. So that's an important thing to think about. Let me go back into my PowerPoint. We'll go back and forth a little bit too. So one of the other things that you can do when you're evaluating the popularity is look at the bestseller list and ratings. You can do New York Times, you can do USA Today. Some authors are going to be in things like 50 books, 20 books to 50K, and may self-report their income or their sales. I may have forgotten to put that as a link on here, but that's a good place for you to go and see how people are doing. There are some very industry niche tools that exist, and you do not have access to them. They are BookScan, which only shows the physical copies that are sold, and PubTrack Digital. And these are services that are provided basically through a bunch of companies that eventually get back up to Nielsen. And you can't just go on to their websites and buy them. They'll even tell you you have to fill out an application to get access to this. And they won't give it to you unless you are a publisher or you're already a known author. There's some other things like journalists and things like that, but you have to essentially be industry to even get access to this. But another good thing is the Kindlepreneur book sales. I'm going to go ahead and open that up and kind of show it to you. And this is free, even though Kindlepreneur is not. And I forgot how I was doing sharing. So can you see this, Daphne, or did I mess up?
Nope, I'm still looking at your PowerPoint.
Okie dokie. Let's move over.
Hey,
We good now?
Shannon, quick
Yeah.
question though. When you were showing those subcategories on the Kindle, are those things that you as an author choose, or are they things that like it get tagged
Both.
in somehow?
There are, I don't remember the exact number. You can choose the categories when you go to put your book into Amazon, but based upon sales, they may put you into a different category because they think your book will sell better with this other information. So there's some categories that you cannot access because Amazon's algorithm will do it, and then there's other categories that you can. So it's kind of a crapshoot, and you'll have to like kind of figure it out when you get there. I know people do have lists about this stuff, but I don't have that on it, unfortunately. But it's both. It's a good question. Hey, baby. All right, so you can come over here and do this awesome thing where you can figure out how much your competitors are actually selling. So if we go back to this guy, this vampire one, in the store, there are the 14,232 best-selling book. And why can I not copy? In the store. You can populate that. This is ebook. You're on Amazon. And It'll tell you how many books they sell per day. There's other stuff that you can look at to figure out what your royalty rates are, because depending on the size of the book and how much they are charging for the book, there's a different royalty rate. But this, once you do it, actually shows you approximately how much they make on that book per day, per month, etc. And so again, this is a free tool that Kinderpreneurial offers. They also do this for audiobooks, and they can do it for like specific elements of your like physical book, but there's a lot more things that go into it, like your connections with Ingram Spark or who your distribution system is, blah blah. But anyway, so if you're doing audio or e-books, this is a great tool to use to compare your competitors' income to what you are hoping to get. So if you're looking at this and you're like, well, if I was able to maintain a standard amount and I beat or match them, then I would be making approximately $600 per month. If it's reasonable to meet them, that's something we're also going to talk about. But this gives you an idea as you go through how much those competitors are making. Okay. Um, and let's pop you back up. I have too many open things. All right. It does not want to. Apologize, guys. My screen does not want to let me do it because I have so much stuff going on with Zoom. Okay, so wow, I went really far. Woohoo. Okay. Pricing strategies and marketing strategies. Follow them on social media, your competitors. Follow their mailing lists. You're going to compile information for a little while. Okay, give yourself a month. See what freebies and goodies they have. Are they using lost leads? Do they, they give you a free short story? Do they let you read the first book for free? Do they have some sort of like shtick or giveaway or whatever? If they're doing something that is like super grabby for attention, like no other author writes from the point of view of a depressed butler. This is the only author you'll get that can do it. Or are they putting people into to raffles or whatever for cool shit? Um, what are their gimmicks? What are their strategies? You can also sometimes see if they're doing BookBub ads. You can see if they're using like specific information, or if they get more feedback, more interaction on a specific social media site or not. A good way to figure out where they are is to go to their website and see where they list their social media as being, and then follow them there and see where they get that interaction. Um, you do want to create data tables for book costs. It's important to notate if you are looking at the first book in a series or a subsequent book in the series. And then if you are an indie, you're going to want to focus on your ebooks and audiobooks because those are where the most sales are. If you're extra, if you want all the information, check back every day for the authors that you have picked to create a sales trend chart because the rankings are going to change. And your rankings when you're doing a really successful launch are going to be much higher than once your book has been sitting inside of the store for a while, or they may be very different if there's something that's thematic that's causing a sale. So doing something over the course of time is more likely to capture accurate data. And then you're also going to want to compare this, if you are extra, to social media newsletter pushes, activities to see if there are trends related to their rankings going up based upon something that you can quantifiably see that they have done. So if they are running sales, if they are doing the giveaway, if they're doing a this or that, if they are sending their books out to other people's newsletters, like if you can see signs of that, then you can determine if those tactics are working for them and if they're more likely to work for you. Um, Find locations where the books are being reviewed by influencers or professional outlets to also see if those reviews have an impact, because most of the time you have to pay the influencers. And if you see no striking change based upon that influencer debuting a review of the book, that influencer probably doesn't matter. Hunt for advertising information by Googling and searching the author on Kindle, on Barnes & Noble, on BookBub to see if you can find the ads. Just be aware, You are costing that author money. And if other people do the same thing, they will cost you money. And another good thing to do is to check Google or Ngrams for popularity for keyword search terms, which are going to include the author's name, their book title, and their series title. And then read all of their reviews. We've already kind of gone over a lot of what's in this section. You want to see the reviews to figure out what people are lacking from that book. And this could be something that's kind of esoteric and very specific to your niche, or it could be something that is more universal. You know, the ending was rushed. Or we wanted the antagonist to be redeemed, and the author seemed like they were going to redeem the antagonist. At the end they just made them a two-dimensional jerk, and it was unfulfilling. Or the sex scene was way too bloody, in this vampire Western romance. Or there wasn't enough blood in the sex scene of my vampire Western romance, and we wanted more. That tells you that there are people out there who want a thing, and this is the best that they can get, but it's still not good enough. So look for those things, especially if you see people listing complaints in multiple locations, like not the same person, but you're seeing the same thing come up in multiple reviews. This tells you that this is something that people want to see, that this book did not deliver and that your book should deliver. Read reviews in a bunch of different places. Amazon and Goodreads can easily be bent by the author's fandom, if they already have a fandom or it's big. Bookmarks is good. Scathing criticisms on Reddit are a great place to find review information for other people. Do not go there for your own books. And then there are review sites that are pretty specific to things. So you do have review sites that are like blogs specifically for crime and mystery. There are blogs specifically for horror and that kind of thing. It's a good thing to go look at professional reviews or semi-professional reviews to see what the professionals also said. All right, it's time to compile your research. At the end of all of this work, you should have a good idea of what is a reasonable upper end of success for the book based upon your competitor. That's what we did when we popped that information into the Kindlepreneur calculator. Like, if your best competitor is making this much money in your genre, that's probably the maximum that you could potentially make if you were super duper lucky. And it is not necessarily indicative of what you will, but that's like your shoot for the stars. You should also have a range of marketing tactics that you evaluated in your competitors, so that you can start putting your own together. You should, figure out if you're going to do a specific strategy for lost leads, for free books, and that kind of stuff. Because, giving away a short story was really big 20 years ago, and it may not work very well now. And then you should also have some ideas to possibly incorporate into your story to kind of hedge out what the other story didn't give their audience. And that can help you sell your book. You cannot use other authors' names on your Kindle listing, just FYI. But if you are trying to say, to an agent, it's like Vampires of the Old West, but with better sex scenes and more blood. That might be part of your pitch. And so knowing what those other books weren't doing for their readership can help you either create your own copy or sell your books to agents or other publishers. The kind of research we've done doesn't necessarily cover all the paid marketing tactics that author has done. It doesn't tell you much about how much they paid for boosted posts and other advertisements. And if you aren't doing a longevity evaluation, you may accidentally have false or not logistically consistent information about things that happened during their launch inside of your data. So there are ways for this to be a little bit messed up, but I mean, I think if you are not writing to market, you may not need to go that in depth. And we'll talk about how to make choices in the next 13 minutes. So this is an example analysis. This is all made up, right? So don't go look up these authors because cheese, it doesn't exist. Now, if I did all of this and I see the average sales of the top seller per month is 200 books, The cost of the book is $4.99. After Amazon takes their cut, the amount they make is $700. If we're doing extra and we've got all of the longevity data and we know that the average median income for that top 20 is $350 per month, then it's a reasonable estimate that if I do some work, I can make between $1,500 and $4,500 dollars per year on this book. Depending on where you are in your life, depending on who you are, this may be like, wow, that's a lot. Or it may be like, I don't know if I want to do that. But the other information you're going to find is, where did the authors get their most engagement? And it looks like in this case, it was Reddit and TikTok. And who is doing that engaging? And it looks like it's mostly 30 or 40-year-old men with military backgrounds or, younger dudes who really like war games. And then you can see what seems to be the best sales tactic for them. Looked like it was giveaways and then engagement on TikTok for relevant, uh, content for the veterans. This clearly could be somebody else's genre, but you're going to do the same kind of thing, like what worked the best. And then how can you improve upon what they did? If the complaints are, this, and this, make sure that you address this, and this when you go to write your book. We're going to also talk about concept testing. This is easier, but less useful, in my opinion. Try not to be an asshole is all I got to say about that. Informal concept testing basically means you're spitballing an idea out to the masses or to hopefully an engaged audience to see how they react to it. And their reaction will help you decide whether or not you're going to go forward with that. So a lot of times we see this done as really it's marketing, but it's like listed as, oh, I'm just trying to get information. And it can work in both ways. You can be trying to give out information about your book to get people hooked in while still trying to get information about how you actually sell a book. So if you see people who are on Facebook groups or in your Discord groups that are like, hey, which cover do you like more? That is concept testing. This is, them asking people who hopefully are their actual readers or people who would be their readers, which one they like more of something. If you're asking for criticism or feedback on your blurbs or your back cover material, and that kind of thing, this is an author saying, this is my concept. Does it work? This is my idea. Would you read this? And again, sometimes people do it really poorly, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm writing this medical thriller about this orphan who's a savant, and they solve medical crimes. And there's a ghost, and there's an elf, and what's the most unrealistic thing that you guys think about? Birth scenes in books, and it doesn't work very well." So be very careful about how you do this, because if you add too much information on the outside, or you add too much gunk, then people will respond to that gunk and they won't give you realistic info. You can also poll newsletter followers about what books to write next. These are all kind of informal concept testing. There's not really numbers associated with them. It's just you kind of spitting that out there to hopefully a real audience. Formal concept testing is something that is done a lot in marketing. And in your case, this would be like getting a bunch of beta readers to give you feedback on a standardized form. That is concept testing. If you are doing paid surveys, if you're paying a marketing company to survey people to figure out what works best, that's concept testing. If you are doing A/B cover and copy testing, or if you are like sending out marketing or advertising post of some sort and seeing which one sells better, that's concept testing. When you go into pitch with agents, that's actually a form of formal concept testing, because they can tell you if your pitch works, if it doesn't, if the idea behind the pitch works, if it doesn't, and if anybody's going to buy it. If you do query packet reviews, this is also, these are all things that you can do that are concept testing. I'm kind of running through that a lot because that one takes a lot less, you don't have to think about that as well, but there are some cons that I think you should know about. It's a lot easier to do concept testing if you already have an audience and are following. If this is your first book, it's really hard to do it because you may not have a true pool of like accurate and reflective people who will respond to your questions. If it's just your mom and her friends and they don't in particular love vampire westerns to begin with, the information you're going to get back out of them is probably not going to be as valuable as you would from, a group of people who actually like what you write, or at least like the genre you write in. Um, Again, if you put a bunch of hazy stuff around it, then the concepts may be confusing to the people you're asking these questions or you're trying to test through. Or they may like look at what you're doing and the comparisons may be inaccurate because that fluff or that gunk is impacting really the message that you're sending. The smaller your sample size, the more likely it's going to skew the results. This is pretty labor intensive too, if you're actually going to try to like pull data out. And then you, as the author, if you're the one doing this, it can be really easy to accidentally have a subjective reaction to the feedback you're getting and dismiss it, even if it's valid. So you can interpret the feedback poorly because you didn't actually want that answer. And that happens without you even realizing it. If I'm like, hey, have you ever heard of a vampire Western? I would really like to write this book. And there's going to be a bunch of blood and sex. And if the person who really likes vampire Westerns says, well, yeah, but I mean, we've already got this person who's doing it so well. I don't know that I would pick up another book. How many books are already written? You're like, well, I don't want to talk to you because you just told me something I don't hear. Anyway, so our ego can get in the way of interpreting data. And so you don't want to let it do that, but it's hard to know when you're doing that, right? Like you don't realize it. So these are the cons of concept testing. Let's talk about free tools because we are nearly out of time. And if we probably won't have time to look at the paid tools, but I will let you know some of them. So your own blood, sweat, and tears are your free tools. But as we said before, go look at your Kindle listings, go look at that Kindlepreneur book sales rank calculator, go look at the bestseller list. Those are all public. If you're writing nonfiction, one of a really good keyword aggregate site for questions people have about books, or if they're looking for books, like this is a very good site for you to say like books about gardening in like level 3 environments, and it'll pop up information about other things people also search for, but then also results, and you can do market research that way. I didn't fail to put in the 20 bucks to 50K group, but there's a lot of freely shared information inside of that group, where people talk about marketing strategies that they've used inside of their launches, or how they've been advertising and how it's impacted. It's a good place for you to spend a year not saying anything but listening. Because if you go and asking very obvious newbie questions, you're going to get ignored or possibly booted, because one of the things they want you to do is read a big heft of information and documentation when you first get in the group. But it's really cool because people will basically post an entire marketing strategy and whether or not it worked. And then again, reading newsletters is good, not just for your competitors, but marketing newsletters. When new stuff comes out, even if it's not book specific, having a ear to the ground when it comes to marketing, especially if you don't have a marketing background, is a good way to kind of slowly by osmosis figure more of this out. There are a number of paid tools that you can use that do basically what I just did this entire hour's workshop on. Kindlepreneur and Publishing Rocket, we did go look at their website, but they have an actual application that you can use that will aggregate all that information that we looked at for you, as well as create like good keywords for you to use in your marketing. And I think they also have like an AI thing now that'll evaluate your cover stuff too. I try to stay away from the AI things anyway. Klytics, if you've seen me do any of these before, I do regularly subscribe to Klytics, and basically it does the same thing, but it gives you a very terrifying Excel file with all of the subgenres and the niches and like how many books the top 10 sell versus the top 20, the trends, the number of books that are being sold in that category. It gives a ton of stuff. KDP Spy is also something that you can use. It's actually a widget or an add-on for your browser that you can go through. And when you go onto Kindle, it will grab data. Actually, I might show you guys that one. Just go back to my screen. Nope, wrong one. Or I might not. We'll see. Okay, yeah. Let's go ahead and just share this. Can you see this? Read back here. Okay. So if you go and you get to your actually no, I can just go over here. All right, so it's part of my thing, right? Um, and I've kind of messed it up. Okay. It doesn't want you to be logged in because your personal account information will impact the results. And it just does not want to work with me. Apologies. So we're going to start on a different page. It'll automatically take you to things. I can go over here and click on a book, and I will load my Kindle Spy thing, and it'll actually show me a bunch of information about this book as far as the sales information once it finishes loading, including, what the sales ranking is, the number of monthly sales, the amount of monthly revenue that's expected, how many reviews, the pricing. I can actually track using Kindle Spy. It's very simple. If I go back out and I pick a specific subgenre or niche, then it'll like review that whole thing for me. And I can see information about trends, if only the first book inside of the genre or the subgenre is selling versus if everybody else is selling. So I can see also the information like how much are they charging for the books, and that sort of thing. And that can be, all the research that you spent a month doing. You spent $80 to get this one time and it does it for you. So some of these things are worth it if you are willing to pay. But sometimes they're not going to be worth it because, like how much do you really need, right? And it's one of those things that you should think about. I'm not going to go too far into it, but there's other things as well, like book bolt. Helium 10 is a more generalized keyword aggregator, and you can also hire us to do the evaluation for you. That is an option. You can go onto our website and go to the general questionnaire and ask for one, and I will probably surely contact you. But before you do all this stuff, organize like this can be your own. Almost anything we can do inside of trying to sell our books, especially because they're near and dear to our heart. It can become overwhelming. The emotions are high because you love this. It's an act of love writing a book for the most part, and it's a devotion to that story. And having to deal with these real world logistical things carries a lot more emotional weight because of it. So before you go on this like crazy tear through marketing, what are your goals for this research? If you're really just trying to help yourself find an agent, you don't need to do half of the stuff that I indicated. But if you are actually looking to make changes to be more marketable, recognizing again that you are not promised success, like yeah, okay, like that's fine. What are your goals? Both are legitimate for your situation, but figure out yours before you start. Don't just do it because I told you to do it. Again, research does not equal success. All sorts of things go into it, and we are not promised an outcome. Occasionally, you may be the very first person to do a thing. There will be no path. You are coming to this rickety bridge that nobody has crossed before, and you are the one that is testing to see if it'll break when you get halfway through, right? Um, you may be there. Most of the time, it's safest to be the next person in line or the person after that who doesn't have to forge the path. But you may have gotten that, that number one in line spot, and you may be creating that genre, that niche. You may be creating the tactics that work. It happens. It's always important to remember your book has value, even if it doesn't fit into a high selling ecosystem. There are a lot of places where you may have a very small group of people who are interested in your book, but it is extremely important to them. It speaks to them. And sales ranking, the amount of money you make off of it may not be important if your goal is to touch another person or to help another person or to provide solace with your writing. Money does not equate value. It's hard to remember that all the time because we live in a capitalistic society, but money does not equate value. And then also determine an end to your research and create benchmarks for ongoing series. If you are somebody who has a hard time jumping when the jump comes, you can easily research yourself into an activity, right? We'd be like, oh no, I need another month before I make a decision. I gotta keep looking. Um, don't do that to yourself. Like figure out ahead of time what you think is an appropriate period of time to research or to like, how much you're actually going to evaluate and then collate that information, figure out what you're going to figure out from it and continue. And yes, you should be consistently doing research, but you don't necessarily need to only consistently be doing research. You need to give yourself space to be creative, to actually sell the book, to reach out to agents to do all of the things, right? So there is a point where you need to stop being a passive observer and start acting. So figure out where that is. If you are doing a series or if you are selling multiple books, the information that you need to figure out for those books may be different, especially if they're in different genres. Or if you're selling book 8, you may not need to do the same amount of research to figure out how to sell that one as you did book 1. So your tactics per book may actually change. So again, the point of this is not just to do it for the sake of doing it. You need to try to avoid overwhelm and figure out what's practical and appropriate for you. And don't let research or the results of your research hinder you from being a creative spirit. Questions? Daphne, is there anything that people have asked that I have not actually covered?
There is not. The chat has been mostly just talking about things that you said.
Very, very chill chat this time, and I definitely love the idea of going on Reddit and seeing like counterpoint kind of things, you know? I've been talking about and reading some of Christopher Rocchio's sci-fi things lately, and it is kind of written differently. And Reddit, when I first went to look up this author because I was going to interview him, was harsh as hell. There was nothing nice on Reddit about this author like that I could find other than tacit agreement of, oh, well, he's popular. Would not have even known that, you go on
That's
other kind of
fascinating
sites.
to me because it seems
Sorry?
like his peeps would be on Reddit.
Yeah.
I feel
No.
like I feel like the kind of people who are going on Reddit and making like fandom comments are not. It's not Tumblr. Like Tumblr is where you go and gush about things. Reddit is where you go to bitch about them.
Yes.
I
And
should I should have said Tumblr. I apologize. I should have added Tumblr on there.
oh, on other platforms, and someone said he's big on TikTok or something like that. Like, there's a lot. Like, he's very popular. But it was interesting to kind of get my introduction because I'm used to Reddit through that. So I love that. Of you're not only looking for the authors that are great, but you're also looking for their counterpoints. Because even if it is like, let's say, an outlier that data adds up. And what you're talking about is really just such a big project. I love the point you made as well that a lot of these kind of analytics things can be done with an app, like you can pay for it, yada yada. But is you either pay in time or you pay in money. And if you
Yeah.
learn what to do, then you're absolutely capable of doing this on your own, adjusting, being even better than an app is. But it just takes the time to research and get it done. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shannon, this was great. I know it's a lot, but if you what's nice is that this is on YouTube, so if you want to go back and read or re-listen to this, you can go learn everything all over again and pause it where you need to.
Yeah, once you have a project in mind, absolutely.
For sure. So I know we are over time, and I thank you guys who were able to stick around. Is that where we had to? We did go over. But I did want to just kind of point out, if you do enjoy writers' lunches, we don't charge for them. But if you would like to give something back to help us, pay for things like our Zoom account, we could always, go over here to our Patreon and give a little something, something, if nothing else. It just shows us a little bit of thanks. But if you don't, it's okay. This is free. Also, if you are looking to get editing on your book, developmental line, copy, anything like that, if you've mentioned that you're a Writer's Lunch participant, you'll get 10% off of your first service. And then if you need a consultation because you don't know what you want to do with your book yet, those are free. And then Daphne, would you remind us what we're doing again next week?
Next week, we're going to be with Ian talking about the good guys, writing unapologetically moral characters.
Fantastic. Well, if you do have questions, you can find me at shannon@tomeworksedits.com. You can also find the recording will be on YouTube. The YouTube channel is youtube.com/writerslunch. I'm sorry, I do not have the link on there. But again, it is youtube.com/writerslunch. And we will see you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.